So, my amplified unit. What do you want to talk about? Relax. We're going to let Cody keep that one. Cody can have that. We know what we're going to talk about in this amped upload. That is the Netflix docuseries titled Mr. McMahon. 6 hours in totality over 6 different episodes, documenting one of the most polarizing, influential, fascinating individuals in this industry. And that'll be for all of time. Vincent Kennedy McMahon. Whether you loved him or you hated him or you were somewhere in the middle, I don't believe there'll ever be anybody as polarizing as VKM. And this docuseries just kind of confirmed that for BC. Now, this docuseries, it took some hits because a lot of people felt there wasn't new stories or a lot of new information on the stories we knew about already going into it. I can see that argument. If you are a tried and true pro wrestling fan, you have heard most of these stories 1,000 different times from 1,000 different people. So I definitely get how much of this 6 hours was fluff. I don't know how many times you can hear the same Monday Night Wars story, right? There's been 86 DVDs on it, 24 docuseries of their own on the Monday Night Wars. We're kind of running the same stories into the ground. So I definitely understand that side of it. But I do feel like we learned a lot of info on the stories we already knew, or at least a lot of them. But the biggest piece was Vince talking about them, right? That's what we didn't have. That was the piece of the puzzle that was never in place. You hear these stories from everybody else in the wrestling world. The wrestlers themselves, whether it's Bret Hart, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, LeVec McMahon. Behind the scenes, you got the Bruce Pritchards, maybe Michael P.S. Hayes, the Eric Bischoffs, insiders like Meltzer and all of them. But Vincent Kennedy McMahon, we don't go through a whole laundry list of subjects and Vince answers to them. And that's what this produced. So no matter how much of it was fluff, to hear Vince talk about all of these subjects, from the Ring Boy scandal and the Wendy Richter screw job to the Bret Hart screw job and so much more. That was the best part of this, I felt. And we're going to run down like most of the high points that were hit in this docuseries. Over the 6 hours, over these 6 different episodes, I put together a little list of things that really intrigued me. It won't take too long, don't worry, but we're going to go over all the things that were touched on and Vince had to speak about. Even reluctantly, but he did. And as far as not having any new stories or new information, aside from what we already knew about, for BC, not entirely true. I found out a lot more about Shane McMahon wanting to purchase UFC when it became available. Shane McMahon, long before, had a chance to buy UFC and asked his father for some help, and Daddy Vince was absolutely not. Did not think that was the right business. And of course, that went on to sell for billions of dollars. Shane McMahon had the right idea. But his father didn't believe in him. So, and it's his money. So at the end of the day, if Vince doesn't think it's right, you're not getting that big loan. But I think Shane McMahon probably held on to a lot of that regret still to this day, to the point where he's having meetings with Tony Khan from All Elite Wrestling. But we're going to touch up on that. And then there's the Hunter Hearst Helmsley story, where he confirms that it was his idea to do the storyline with Stephanie McMahon. So poor Test. Test was the individual originally in that story. Hunter claims that writers didn't know where the story was going to go. So Hunter came up with the idea, put me in there, and I have an idea. I was like, if that is not Hunter, if that's not everything I've ever told you about Hunter, man, in a nutshell, he will do anything to get closer to just the top. And he did it when he got to the company, and he chummed it up with Shawn Michaels. They had nothing in common. Shawn Michaels was a partier. Shawn Michaels was just out there. He was not in the right headspace. Paul Levesque McMahon could have like hung out with Brett and all of them. They were staying cool, kosher. They were all about the business. And Shawn Michaels and all them, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, they were just partiers and wild. But they were always in Vince's office. They were always in Vince's ear. They were always right there side by side with Vince. So Hunter knew he had to go with them. And he just became like their designated driver as part of the clique. But it was wild to hear that it was indeed. I'm not shocked, but I kind of am. Because I'm like, wow. Like poor Test was done dirty. Test was done dirty. Because at that point, Levesque McMahon was already in Vince's office and ear all the time. So he had leverage. Test was just happy he finally got a storyline, man. He's going to be in there with the boss's daughter. And let's see if Test can become something really big. Test got Das Boot. And Hunter Hearst Helmsley was in his place. And we all know how that worked out, man. The second Hunter gets one foot in the door, that's it. So this dude, man, you can't even knock him, you know? You cannot knock Hunter Hearst Helmsley, man. He kissed all the right ass and he got to the top. How do you even knock that? Like, he played the game literally. Stomped on a lot of people in the way. Maybe it wasn't done in the best of ways, but he got to the top of the company, man. Or at least creatively. Endeavor. I think a lot of people thought him, Stephanie, were going to take the company over one day. But Vince threw a curveball and sold it. So... But, yeah, that was a wild story, man. We'll go over that, too. Possibly that's on the list. That was wild. So you did find out a lot, man. It was just a fascinating watch. And, it's funny because the WWE tagline is then, now, forever. And for Vince, you could look at this as then, now, and forgotten. Because they are just simply trying to erase that dude within Endeavor. They won't even talk about this dude. And you watch this docuseries and it's like, this was all because of him. But that's how much they want to wash their hands with all of this bad press and just all the, this is why it's such an odd decision that Netflix decided now, right before this big move, they're getting Raw. They spent all this money and they want to shine light on this. And now everybody in WWE is going to be asked about this, and it's going to create all these new discussions, open up Pandora's box about Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And this is why you heard the reports that people in WWE were furious. This is why you heard Hunter Hearst Helmsley was pissed off. Because it's like, dude, seriously? We're trying to swipe that underneath the rug. You're putting a spotlight on it. And we're supposed to be doing business with you at the top of the year. And Netflix is like, listen, we paid you $5 billion. We're going to get every bit of that back. And if Vince is the most polarizing dude, that's what we're told. That's who's going to get 6 hours dedicated to him. Wild, man. So let's go over it. Again, I put together a pretty cool list of all the things discussed. Some wild quotes from Vince himself. So if you guys can smash that up, help out that algorithm, let BC know you're fully amplified. I appreciate that. Salute. I'm going to actually make this coffee, finish it off if you don't mind. Some fresh Dunkin' extra. Yeah, that will work. That's the magic potion, man. It's been a minute since I showed you guys the double shot Dunkin'. So we'll do this the right way. You guys will get the first salute for this amped upload talking Netflix, Mr. McMahon. But Vince had to answer a lot of questions on a lot of heavy situations and scenarios that happened over the years in his own company on his watch, like the Ring Boy scandal. You guys remember, 3 people went down for the Ring Boy scandal. One of them came back, Pat Patterson. But that was always Vince's MO, right? If you're in his circle, he is fiercely loyal to you. Pat Patterson was always coming back, no matter how wild the stories were from the Ring Boy scandal, how horrible they were. Patterson was always going to find his way back. Because that's Vince, fiercely loyal. Even through the Jimmy Snuka controversy, Vince always had Snuka's back. And even when Snuka passed on, his daughter Tamina Snuka always had a job on Vince's watch. Even when she was not wrestling, even when we believe she was retired, she was still on the active roster. Up until recently, I think Endeavor is trying to clean up that roster, get their money back. But Vince McMahon had Tamina Snuka on that active roster even when she was not active. And that stems from his loyalty for some reason, whatever reason, with Jimmy Snuka. Kevin Dunn's father saved the video library from a fire. Because of that, Kevin Dunn had a job for life. Until Vince was obviously gone, and then Kevin Dunn's like, I'm out too. Deuces, ooses. Because he knew his time was limited. Once Vince was gone, it was open season on Kevin Dunn. But while Vince was still in charge, Kevin Dunn had a job for life. And over you see these scenarios, right? If you're in Vince's circle, he'll go above and beyond for you. You know, Bruce Pritchard tells a story in this doc about how his wife was given a 4-year life expectancy. And because Vince got her the top-notch care, that was 24 years ago. So, you know, Bruce Pritchard and so many others feel like they should be and have to be fiercely loyal right back. So Pat Patterson was one of those dudes. But they talked about the Ring Boy scandal. They talked about the steroid scandal, obviously. It was very interesting hearing, you know, just Hulk Hogan brought in by the prosecution to testify against Vincent Kennedy. But Hulk says in this doc, they thought I was going to just hammer down on Vince. But I knew exactly what I was going to say when I got in that courtroom. And Hulk actually helped out Vince. So it was to the contrary of what prosecution was hoping for. We went to the Wendy Richter screw job, man. A lot of people don't even realize, way before the Bret Hart screw job, the Montreal screw job, it was Wendy Richter. Didn't want to give that title up the way that Vince wanted her to. So Vince taught her a very hard lesson that night. And Wendy Richter was screwed. Title changed hands. And it was interesting because a quote from Vince, when he was asked, you know, Wendy says it's not fair. A lot of people think that was not fair that night. And Vince said, life is not fair. That was his answer. It gives you so much insight on Vince, right? Life's not fair. That's what you get, you know. To Vince, it's just a business decision. That night, one call, he's already done forgotten about it. But somebody like Wendy or somebody like Bret Hart, you know, that's their whole career and that stays with them forever. But Vince doesn't really think of that. Doesn't think of like the human being and what it does for them. Can we come to another resolution? Gives you a lot of insight. Shane McMahon on a later episode was talking about how him and his pops, you know, they were wrestling or doing something. And Shane said, wait, that's not fair. You cheated. And Vince McMahon was like, you just learned something. You cheat to win. Like in business, you're going to learn. You're going to have to cheat at times. If you don't, you'll just fail. You know, so he's teaching his kid, you're going to have to cheat. Like not too many fathers are going to tell your kid, listen, not only is it all right to cheat, you're going to have to cheat at times, especially in business. So Shane McMahon was like, all right, I just learned I got to cheat. So that was the Wendy Richter screw job story. And again, the most fascinating part was just when asked about like everybody thinking that just wasn't fair. Like, how do you feel about that now, all these years later? And his response was, life is not fair. Interesting. One of the things that was talked about over the next couple of episodes was just the booking of Vince and how it needs, some of that has to be around today, right? How you get to certain matches, how you build to them. Hunter Hearst Helmsley has to bring a lot of that back. Like Vince talked about like the importance of face versus heel. And he talked about how he wanted to get the championship to Hulk Hogan, but Bob Backlund had it at the time. So he's like, there's no way I'm doing Bob Backlund and Hulk Hogan. And he's not totally opposed to, at times, face versus face, by the way, like Warrior Hogan WrestleMania 6. But he knew that made no sense. Backlund and Hogan, you're splitting your audience for the wrong reasons. So he devised a plan to have Backlund take on Iron Sheik. Sheik would be the middleman, right? Sheik had all this heat anyway. He could garner more. Take the title from Backlund. That's going to piss off a lot of fans. This new superhero comes in, Hulk Hogan, to take out the dastardly heel. So Vince's original concept was get the title off of Backlund, put it on Hogan. I can't have Backlund Hogan. Let me use the Iron Sheik. Worked out to perfection. Any older fans out there, you remember Iron Sheik, Hulk Hogan, Madison Square Garden, all that good stuff. It worked to perfection because a lot of thought was put into it. And you're not just doing careless, reckless booking, right? Like in today's pro wrestling, if you want to get to the title over to somebody else, it doesn't matter if it's face versus face, heel versus heel. Hunter S. Helmsley is just putting him in there. You know, Backlund, Hogan, just do the match. I want Hogan to get the title. You can't do that. You know, he also talked about, like, what was it? The Sergeant Slaughter. Slaughter was a face, but he wanted to have Slaughter versus Hulk Hogan, right? So he's like, all right, what we're going to do is Slaughter is going to go heel, and I mean full throttle heel. like that was during the Gulf War, 1991-ish. So he had him totally going against the U.S. So Slaughter goes heel. He takes the title from the Ultimate Warrior, and then that leads it to Hogan Slaughter WrestleMania 7, where Hogan gets the title. So this is what I mean. That's what Vince would do, is he would just map it out so long in advance, and the stories would be so special, because back then you only had 4 pay-per-views anyway. This was even before King of the Ring. You had Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series. So Vince could make a lot of dynamic storylines, and you had a lot of time to do it. And back then you didn't have 5-6 hours of television either, so it felt more special. You could do a lot more with smaller time, believe it or not. So, you know, Vince just paid attention to what is known in the business, and it's a lost art, unfortunately. But long-term storytelling, that's what Vince was really good at, and he mapped this stuff out well in advance. And in today's pro wrestling, you just don't do that. You just have face versus face matchups, heel versus heel. You know, your diabolical heels don't even feel like it, right? Like Braun Breaker is supposed to be a diabolical heel. Right? It's Braun Breaker. He's coming out and he's smashing all your baby faces. So why, when he goes to a promo, and this was just recently, he gets on the mic and he looks around the crowd and he goes, "Where's all my dogs at?" And they're supposed to bark. That's called pandering to the crowd. You're being a babyface now. So what are you doing? You're just ruining Braun. Is he a diabolical heel? Is he a babyface? Nobody knows. Gunther, supposed to be a diabolical heel, right? And he's so good at it. So why do you have him going out there and shaking the hands of Randy Orton, one of the top babyfaces? Just because they had a good athletic contest. You know, you would never see Slaughter shake Hogan's hand after WrestleMania 7 for a reason. Vince had to protect the characters, and he knew that. Hunter's not protecting the characters, and that's where the problem lies. We understand the cat's out of the bag, the magic tricks are exposed, kayfabe is nearly dead, we understand, but it has to be a semblance of alive. That candle cannot totally go out on kayfabe. Kayfabe has to stay burning. If you totally lose kayfabe, wrestling's done. It has no chance to survive. You have to have some kayfabe. Everybody has to be on. Everybody has to be in on the illusion. So that's what Vince was so well, you know, just versed in. And this is where Hunter lacks so badly in. That, you know, when we got to this part of the doc, I was just stunned by just hearing it. You know, I mean, I lived through it, so I remember the feuds and the matches and the title going to the Sheik and then the Hogan and Warrior dropping it to Slaughter, and I remember exactly how it was done. It was Royal Rumble 91. Macho Man came down with a scepter, hit Warrior over the dome piece, Slaughter took the cover. And that led to, by the way, not just Slaughter and Hogan at 7, that led to an even better storyline. Macho Man Warrior at 7, loser, their career is over. And that, of course, led to the Miss Elizabeth Macho Man reunion at 7. Magical, man. But yeah, that just brought back so many just like memories of just how it was done back in the day. And if you wanted the title on somebody else, cool. Do it properly. And make sure the matches are meaningful. Make sure it does justice by the character, by the wrestler. Just don't see that these days. But it was cool listening to the Vince talk about like what went into the booking, you know? Like, and when he was talking about it, like he got excited again, you know? He's like, you know, I knew I had to get the title off Backlund and put it on Hogan, but how do I do that? I can't do that. So I said, I need to use the Iron Sheik. And I was just like, man, like just to go behind the scenes, whether you love the dude or hate the dude, back in the day, he was an absolute mastermind to this wrestling, an absolute genius to this stuff. What else did we talk about in those earlier episodes? We talked to the Vince's reaction to Hogan and the NWO. And he really, I mean, he said he just wanted to choke Hulk Hogan. That's what he said, man. He was pissed off at Hulk Hogan, you know, because there was a relationship a little bit beyond just, he's his boss. He really put a lot into Hogan. They spent so much time together. And to watch Hogan now just totally trying to destroy WWF because that's what was happening. And Vince, confirmed that again, how close they were from going under because of the NWO. But we saw so many highlights on the doc, and it brings you back to that Attitude Era and just how good we had it, man. Like, as wrestling fans, I don't know if it'll never be that good. It can't. Times have changed. So you'll never get that back. But being a teenager in those years, Cloud 9, I can't tell you how special of a time. And if you want just a taste, if you're younger and you weren't around for that era, if you want a taste of it, check out this doc series. And just, as they're talking about it, they're showing all these clips, and it's like, dude, that was just a taste of it. And they talked about like how they were getting more teenage viewers than Monday Night Football back in the day. More teenage viewers than Monday Night Football. That's what I'm telling you. When the product is lightning hot, people are going to flock to it. All the demographics, because your product is so damn good. They were pulling more teenage viewers than Monday Night Football. And then they also talked about the volatile atmosphere and the conduct at schools, right? A lot of schools were complaining because people like BC were coming in, students with Suck It shirts. Literally, there were shirts that were printed up for a group called D-Generation X. And it would say suck it, and there would be an arrow pointing down. And you're talking kids, man. Middle school, junior high, high school, going to school with these shirts. Or Stone Cold just says F off, but it's there's like two skulls with the U and the C, I believe. But fuck off, Stone Cold, and you're going to school with this. You have teachers that are kind of they got their feelings in a bunch, so you're being sent to the principal's office. Principal is like, all right, I gotta adhere to the teacher. Here comes the parents. It was a whole thing, guys. So they relived that. And how eventually they did have to go PG. But we got to enjoy that whole era, man. We kind of, I guess we're kind of the reason it went PG, huh? Hey, man, we lived it up. I'll tell you that. Maybe Netflix will change it in the future. We also talked, of course, the Wendy Richter screw job. We talked the Montreal screw job. With Bret Hart and just listening to Bret talk about it. And again, hearing him say, like, I thought about Wendy Richter before the bell rang. I thought Wendy. Because he wasn't trusting anything. He was like, I don't put it past Vince to do anything at this point. I didn't trust him. And it was interesting because Vince was asked about it, like, all these years later, how do you feel about it now? And Vince says, and I quote, I don't regret any of it. I don't regret any of it. And BC's thinking, obviously, man, just think of Wendy, right? This is not the first time. This is the second time, man. Twice. If you do it twice, there's just no regret, right? I mean, you're setting a trend at this point. You're showing everybody that you are willing to absolutely call the match yourself. You will make that bell ring. It doesn't matter what the plan finishes or what you discussed. He did it with Wendy. He did it with Bret. And if he was still around, anybody else would have to be looking over their shoulder because he could do it a third time. So obviously he had no regret for Bret Hart. He did it with Wendy. This was the second time. They talked to Owen Hart. Man, that was wild. Just kind of reliving that and the whole Owen Hart thing and continuing on with the show, which is still to this day very, really, it's really... What's the word I want, man? It's polarized. It's a polarizing topic. I'll just leave it at that, man. A lot of people, I would say most say the show should have stopped on the dime. Now I could see if they truly didn't know that he had passed at the time, and you only have a couple matches left. The crowd did not see it, right? And that's what they were talking about in the documentary, is that they were in the middle of a blackout. So, you had some ads playing. So the whole arena's blacked out, and that's when it happened. So nobody actually saw it. So people would be confused. Wait, what happened? He fell. Is he all right? What do you mean the show's over? I get it if you didn't know. But this doc claims that they found out that he had passed during the show still. And at that time is when they should have pulled the plug, because his blood is still in the ring. They were wrestling with Owen's blood still on the apron. So, yeah, I could totally see those that go, listen, that show should have stopped. That's one of the things I don't beat Vince on too badly on. I don't beat him up too much on that, because in the moment, I mean, there's so many things going on. You got a couple matches left. You don't want to send your whole audience away before the night ends. They didn't even see what happened. Like, they just know that Owen fell. So it's like, can we just get these matches over, and then we just have to think, what is happening? You're in the moment, and Vince said something so so vivid, and it puts you into his mindset. He said, I did what I would do for me. If that was me and I had fallen and I had passed right there, he said, I would want the show to keep going. He said that in this docuseries. He said, that's exactly what I would do. I would say, keep the fucking thing going. You don't stop the show. He said, sweep me aside, something like that. Sweep me aside, keep the show going. And I believe him 1,000,000,000%. Like, that's just Vince's mentality. So it's not just like, it's not just like he just looks down at the wrestlers and they're just a dime a dozen to him. Like, Vince literally he'll do it himself. Like, I still remember, who was it? Gronk, when he didn't want to fall off the platform at WrestleMania a couple years ago, and Gronk was scared. Vince, at his age, this was just a couple years ago, he went over the ledge and he goes, this is how you do it. He just jumps. He just leaped at his age. There's stories from everybody that says Vince will not ask you to do anything that he wouldn't do himself, and he has proven it. So I know, a lot of people just think he just takes a shit on the wrestlers because they're beneath him, but I truly believe him when he says, if that happened to him, sweep him aside, continue the show. It's business. And that's not always the right mentality. I get it. But at least there's consistency in his viewpoint. If he would do it for himself, he didn't have all the information, and there was only a match or two left at the time that they found out. That's the thing, though. I didn't know they had found out during the show. I thought it was right after. Or no, Jim Ross did announce it. Jim Ross announced it live. So of course they knew that he had passed. That's what it was, yes. So they announced that Owen Hart has passed, and then they went on with the wrestling show. That's what it was. Wow, man, that's wild. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's why most people are like, the show should have stopped. Because it was weird. They showed on the doc, Jeff Jarrett was about to cut up. He's cutting a promo. And first he says, Owen, we're thinking about you. So this must have been maybe before they actually knew, confirmed that he had passed. So he's like, Owen, we're thinking, and Deborah's behind him crying in tears. And then he totally switches it up because he's got to get back into character. And he's like, and blah, 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 whoever he's in the feud with. He's like, these are my knockers. You understand me? These are mine. I'm talking about Deborah's booyagas. So Deborah is supposed to be looking sexy with her knockers, and she's in tears. So in that aspect, yeah, the show should have stopped because the performers were devastated. You know what I mean? That's what it comes down to. You're asking for all intents and purposes, his brothers and sisters in that ring, in that locker room, you're asking them to go out there knowing that it wasn't confirmed at the time, they knew that from what Jerry Lawler was telling them, that he was not going to make it. And that trickled into the locker room. So now you're asking them to go out and perform. I don't know, guys. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but that was to relive that story and to listen to the different takes on it. And again, just to hear Vince talk about it. You never heard Vince really dissect his decisions like this. The Chris Benoit situation. They talked about Benoit and just a lot of these wrestlers not believing in CTE. That was interesting in this doc. Stone Cold came right out and said, I'm not a CTE guy. Is it CTE? All the concussions and it leads to just bad stuff. Stone Cold says, I'm not. And Stone Cold said, and if you are getting a ton of concussions wrestling, you're not doing this correctly. I mean, he was candid. Stone Cold said, if you're getting that many concussions, you're not doing it right. You should not be getting hurt that much. He's kind of right, too, by the way. You know, after 3 or 4, you might have to think, wait, what am I doing? Maybe change my style. Careful who I'm working with. You know, Bryan Danielson's another dude. He's got like 87 concussions. Slight exaggeration, but yeah, these dudes, they don't learn. They keep doing it and doing it and doing it. Undertaker, not a big CTE guy himself, old school. He's like, don't take away the chair shots. What are you doing? That's part of what we do. And Vince sounds like he's not into it either. He just wanted to work with Chris Nowinski just because he was burying the company at the time. So Vince called Nowinski and said, dude, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? He said, we'll help you out as long as you're actually putting this to real study and you can produce real results. Well, Chris Nowinski did that, but a lot of the wrestlers are really not connecting the dots. They're like, this doesn't make sense. This is a little shady. That's not panning out. So it doesn't sound like Vince is big on it either. But in fact, Vince said what happened was the dude he lost it. He said it happens in every aspect of life. You know, the dude lost it. That was it. You can try to come up with all the excuses and the CTs and all that, but the dude just lost it. He wasn't all there. They also talked, for a while, this was interesting with the Owen Hart thing real quick. Bret thought for a while, because of what happened with him and Vince, you know, did they do this on purpose? Bret Hart thought that they killed Owen to get back at Bret. I mean, that's wild. And it wasn't until a police officer called Bret and said, we did our due diligence. The investigation is finished and there was no wrongdoing on WWE's behalf. Only then did Bret have a sigh of relief and stop thinking that way. But isn't that wild, man? Bret actually thought WWE did that on purpose just to get back at him. And then, as we said earlier, man, Hunter's idea for the Stephanie storyline. I did not know that, man. I knew, like, once he was in the storyline, there was no way that he was not walking out in real life marrying Stephanie, because that's what Hunter does. The second he leeches onto you, that's it. The second he got in Vince's door, he was going to be tied to the hip of Vince. The second he got in the story with Stephanie, he was going to marry Stephanie. That's Hunter, man. I don't even... It's what he does. You know what I mean? By any means necessary to get to the top, no matter how much ass needs to be kissed, and that's not even shade, because it worked. You got to give the dude props. He played the game of life and he won. So it's not even like shade. People think I'm just like, it's shade. No, he kissed all the right ass at all the right times. And he took Test out of that storyline. This documentary, he claims, listen to this. So Hunter claims that the writers didn't know where to go with the story with Test and Stephanie. Okay, oftentimes that happens. You'll find your way through it. You know, let them build their chemistry. You know, they worked really well together, Test and Stephanie. But at that time, Hunter was tied to the hip of Vince already. So Hunter says, well, wait, I have an idea. Boot to Test. Put me in this. We can do this. This, and this. So they removed Test on Hunter's request, and they went with Hunter and Stephanie. And we all know how that ended up. Hunter was in now with Stephanie, and Hunter talks about in this doc how they were just spending so much time together because they're in the storyline, and they came out married in real life. You know, China got Das Boot. Unfortunately, there was an affair being done, and China took that really hard. But Hunter wasn't thinking about China, man. Hunter was like, OMG, it worked. I got Vince to sign off on it. I'm in a story with Steph. We're spending all this time together. Sorry, China, not sorry. I got to do this. They came out married. That was wild to hear that it was Hunter's idea. I shouldn't be shocked. I should have probably guessed that from the beginning. I should have known that was Hunter who said, take Test out, put me in. Poor Tess, man. That was going to be a big break for Tess, and Tess was never the same after that, and unfortunately passed away not long after. Much love and respect over to Tess, man. I always enjoyed his work. But yeah, a couple people got screwed over in that whole thing, man. China, also no longer, man. Yeah, they were all never the same after that. China, Test, just a lot of things got flipped upside down because Hunter was just like, put me in there. Put me in there instead. Wild. Again, BC never knew that, so I learned that in this doc. Stephanie. Speaking of Stephanie, this was hilarious. So Stephanie was asked, don't you find it a little bit weird, all the things that your father had you doing, like just, the way she was dressing, making out with the Tests or the Hunter Helmsleys and the Chris Jerichos and, wrestling her own father. There was about to be a story. Vince said there was about to be a story about how he impregnated his daughter, Stephanie. And I guess maybe it was USA. Somebody nixed it. They were like, absolutely not. That's the line. But Stephanie was asked, don't you find it a little weird? And Stephanie said, and I quote, or the question was, and I quote, did you find it weird your father was having you do all those things? And her quote, her answer was, yeah. Hold on, let me get the exact quote here, man. Yeah, sometimes I thought it was a little bit weird. Sometimes I thought it was a little bit weird. Yeah, it's, when he comes to you and says, we're going to have an I'm going to impregnate you storyline. It's probably we just leapfrog from kissing all of these dudes to now the father's going to impregnate her. Wild, man. So even Stephanie said, even when she was asked to do it and was doing it, she was like, yeah, sometimes it was weird. Yeah, it probably shouldn't be that way when your father is asking you to do something. So you had to feel bad for Stephanie there, man, but Stephanie went along with it. And then, just Vince's wild angles with Trish Stratus and Sable. Sable's lawsuit against WWE and Vince bringing her back not long. So Vince settled a lawsuit with Sable and then brought her back. And brought her back as his affair, too. Right into a storyline where Vince is all over her, groping her, and they're making out. And I'm like, right after the lawsuit. And he was asked about that, and he was this was the oddest part of the entire 6 hours, the 6 episodes. Vince was asked about it and goes, who? Sable? And then he just started smirking a little, and he wouldn't give an answer. And Paul Heyman is off camera, and he's allegedly, had the affair or something, allegedly storyline-wise. It's almost like they were alluding to something happened IRL with Sable and Vince. And maybe that's why that lawsuit was settled and she was brought back and they were just making out on camera. Was there more to it? And don't forget, Sable ended up with Brock Lesnar IRL. They were married, still are. And Vince McMahon, allegedly anyway, shared these women with Brock Lesnar. Right up to this new one, Janelle Grant. Brock was named in that whole thing because Vince said, you sign back and you get to play with her or something. And Brock's like, yeah. Didn't actually meet up with her, but Brock was involved in all that. So was there a scenario where Brock and Vince were doing something with Sable? Because it was weird. If you guys check that part out, man, Vince got all weird. You hear Paul Heyman enter, who's off camera. I don't know why he's there for Vince's interview. But that was weird. There's definitely more to the story between Sable, Vince, and Brock. There's a lot more that needs to be told because this was a big lawsuit. It was settled on the fly, and all of a sudden she was brought back right into an affair angle where they were all over each other, Vince and Sable. Very odd. They talked the XFL, the colossal fail of the XFL in the Bob Costas interview, all of the interviews. Whenever Vince does an interview, it usually ends with Vince about to punch out the guy interviewing him. And they showed the Bob Costas thing. I didn't know the XFL failed that miserably. I was around for it. I knew it had failed big time. I didn't know how bad it was, but ratings dropped 75% after a week or two. It was wild. After just one season, Das Boot. And it was the biggest fail of any of Vince's endeavors. And he's had restaurants, casinos, you name it. There was a whole episode basically toward the end. Maybe it was like the final one on like Shane McMahon. That was very odd. They spent a lot of time on Shane. I know he's a big part of the story, Vince's son, but there was a lot on Shane O'Mac. The biggest story, the best story was just Shane talking about how, or Vince really talked about how Shane wanted to buy the UFC when it became available and needed a lot of financial backing from Vince, his father. And Vince was like, absolutely not. You want to do it? Cool. It's going to be on your dime. And it was just something he didn't want to do. And Shane was adamant. Come on, this could be big. We can flip it and sell it for way more than we're buying it for. Vince was absolutely adamant that it is not going to happen. He could not come up with the money. Shane never bought UFC. UFC a few years later was sold for billions of dollars. How wild is that, man? Shane O knew it was a gold mine. But Vince just didn't see it. I think to this day that pisses off Shane. But that was really wild to hear just the details on that. And that he had a real chance to buy the UFC. And isn't it weird how it all worked out, right? Because now Endeavor owns WWE, who also owns UFC, so now they're in bed together anyway. Wild, man. And then they went into the big scandal now with the Janelle Grant and the current lawsuits and the investigations, federal, and so many more. And it was wild because they just showed there was just a caption, after the allegations, Vince never showed up for his last interview. And it just shows Vince's empty chair, the interview setting, the atmosphere, and just an empty chair. And it was wild. One of the last things he said in the interview that he did do for this is he said, he was asked about retiring. He said, never going to retire. Never. He goes, you retire, you die. He says, I look down on people like that. You want to retire? Good. Go die. He's like, I'll never retire. And then the caption shows up, like days later, Vince retired after, an investigation, something like that. So I was like, damn, like, yeah, never retire on your own accord. But he was forced into retirement. That's why he came back. They covered that too when he came back, because he was like, I was told to retire. I didn't want to retire. I got bad advice. I'm fighting this. And then came the Janelle Grant stuff, and then he was out. But that's it, man. That's just some of the stuff that was really intriguing. They covered everything within a 6-episode, 6-hour time frame. A lot of the stuff, yes, we did hear, so it was fluff to us. But a lot of it did have details added on to it. It was cool to hear Vince's answers to this and Vince's, just his thoughts on all of this that happened over the last several decades on his watch. That was the coolest part. Vince asked about it and Vince responding. So that's it, guys. If you haven't watched it, I would definitely, if you ever have time, absolutely give it a watch. I watched most of it in the air on a flight. I had an 8-hour flight. I was able to catch at least 4 of the episodes. And I wanted to get this out to you guys yesterday, but I just had so much to do. I got another upload out to you guys yesterday. Hopefully you caught it. So this got pushed back to today. But such is. I'm happy I got the 6 in. I'm glad that I did watch it. It was so interesting. Cool to relive so many moments that I got to live through while it was happening. And, just reminisce on those. But also to hear all the details all these years later. So if you didn't watch it, I definitely would recommend it. And if you did watch it, hopefully you enjoyed this discussion. It was, you talk about the rise and fall of Vincent Kennedy McMahon. This pretty much summed it up in a nutshell. That's what I got for you guys, man. Until next time. And there will be that next time, top guys. We're out, BC and the unit saying check you. Salute.